Hello, everybody. My name is Katie Earle. I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and this is our first interview that we're doing with one of our instructors for University Express. I'm here with Dr. Phil Stevens, and we're super excited to do this interview with him. I have a couple questions that we'll go through. Some questions I've actually received from some of you being our participants. So Phil, shall we get started?
Sure.
Okay. Well, the first question I have for you is, what inspired you to get into the field of anthropology?
After college, I joined the Peace Corps. I was an English major in college, and I was sent to Nigeria to teach English. And I was employed at a high school, a very interesting situation, a co-ed Muslim high school, a very progressive order of Islam, which stressed equal co-education. And the schools in Nigeria then followed the American schedule. So we had long vacations in the summertime. And Peace Corps volunteers were obliged to take other jobs. We were allowed 1 free week in the first year and 2 free weeks in the second year. The rest of the time we had to account for ourselves with some other employment. And to make a long story short, I started working with the Nigerian museums, the Federal Department of Antiquities. For a while, I drove around the country, or I should say the region, recording interesting sculptures and other religious items that were still in use that the museums might acquire later after their owners had given them up or had converted to Christianity or whatever. So for several months, from 1963 to 1965, I was doing 2 interesting jobs, teaching Yoruba-speaking kids English and learning how their minds were translating Yoruba into English, which was itself an anthropological experience for me, and their beliefs and their roles and social situations as high school kids in a developing country. And all of that was fascinating to me. I got involved in a case of sorcery, which really stimulated my interest in that kind of belief system. And the Nigerian Museum put me to work with a mysterious collection of stone carvings, which even today in 2021 remain a mystery. And that experience further cemented my realization that anthropology was really what I wanted to do. I extended my tour by a full year, and in 1966, I returned to America to the graduate program at Northwestern in anthropology. And 2 years later, I was back in Nigeria again doing my doctoral dissertation research. So I was hooked by my Peace Corps experience, really. And those little illustrations I've given you are each a long, long story and fascinating stories. I had lots of really fascinating experiences in my first tour of Peace Corps duty, and then later, 2 or 3 more years doing anthropological research in a different area of the country. I could go on, but one of my interests in anthropology, as you know, is magic, sorcery, and witchcraft, which I have talked about for the University Express program. And my first interest in that area was generated in the Peace Corps. I'll tell you that story. I'll make it short. Our boys' table tennis team were West African champions. Most schools' sports programs focused on soccer. Not our school. Our boys weren't much interested in soccer, but table tennis was the school's passion, really. And we were engaged in in the dry season of 1964. We were engaged in the finals of the All Muslim Schools Table Tennis Championships. And our team and the opposing team had 2 games apiece, and the score in the final game was 20-20. This is true. And suddenly there was a shout from outside the games hall. Hundreds of students ran after one boy who was a lower form boy from our school. He had obtained a magical device from the local market, which he was using to ensure our victory against the other team. He was actually putting a hex on the other team. He was only about 10 years old. He really didn't know what he was doing. He did this out in the open where he could be seen. The other students were terrified of what he was doing, and they chased after him to try to beat him senseless, to nullify whatever dangerous forces he had let loose. A hasty meeting was called in the principal's office of the principals, vice principals, and games masters. I was the games master for our school. That's the same as the athletic director. And the boy was suspended from school. The match was to be played over again at a neutral school some weeks later. And we lost. The boy never returned to our school, quite wisely, I think. The magical items were displayed. It was an old European-style padlock that was covered with hyena fur, and a large iron staple. The staple is driven into the ground. A curse is spoken. The padlock is locked over the staple, and the symbolism of locking is universal, So the words of the curse were locked into place symbolically. And the boy had done this with a curse against the other team. The students there were students from both schools present at the match, and they were just terrified. It was a stunning experience for me, a 21, 22-year-old Peace Corps volunteer. It really shaped my further plans and my thinking about the world and about people's conceptions of the world. The story about the stone images is a whole nother story. I wrote a book about them, which was published in 1978. And in 2012, I was invited back to that village, and I was given an honorary chieftaincy title for the work I had done back in the 60s and 70s to work with the stone images, to repair them and catalog them, and I supervised the construction of a new museum complex for them. and thousands of visitors came to the village, which was prosperous for the village itself. And I was honored with a chieftaincy title in 2012. And those experiences really helped to shape me. They were, among the highlights of my entire life. I did a little bit of anthropological investigation in the Caribbean. My parents were planning to retire to the island of Grenada. And they built a house there, actually, but they gave it up later and moved back to the States. But during that short time in the 1980s and 70s and 80s, I was able to do a little research in the Caribbean. But most of my anthropological research was done in Nigeria. And Nigeria is really a fascinating country. It's large and it covers nearly all of the ecological zones of the entire continent are represented in Nigeria, with the exception of the desert. But the scrub, the lower desert, is represented, mountains, savannas, rainforests, and all are there, and a huge variety of human adaptations. There are a couple of thousand, probably, different language groups in Nigeria. It's an extremely heterogeneous nation, and there's still an awful lot of traditional anthropology left to be done there. What's next?
I'm just wondering a couple things. One, are you good at table tennis, or were you good at it back in the day?
Pretty good, but I could not last with those boys. They were good. They were really, really good. This is ping pong, this is a leisure recreational game for us, but it's taken very seriously in some nations, like in Asia. And it's an Olympic sport. And I have no idea how it caught on amongst a few schools in Nigeria, but it did. And it was the school's passion. We did have a soccer team. We had the girls played netball, which is like basketball, but not the same. I tried to introduce track and field. That didn't work very well. I tried to introduce softball, and that didn't last. But table tennis was, as I said, the school's passion. I played recreationally. I guess I started before college. So I knew the rules, and I couldn't coach. They knew the game far better than I did. So I could just kind of supervise.
Now, were you able to learn their language? How was it communicating with them when you first arrived?
Interesting question, and it's a very important question because language is the vehicle of culture. And to understand culture as an anthropologist you really have to know the language. But Nigeria's official language is English. They were a British colony from the late 19th century, and the language of instruction in all schools was English. And in the larger towns and cities, English was sufficient. So I didn't need to speak the traditional language in order to get along. But to be a better teacher, I took a course in Yoruba. Yoruba is the major language of the region where I was, because it helped me to understand how the students were processing English. They had grown up learning Yoruba, and their brains were constructed to process words in the structure of Yoruba. They were learning English words as synonyms for Yoruba words, but they were processing the English words according to the Yoruba structure. And the English they were speaking was interesting, to say the least. And to be a better teacher, I found it advantageous to learn the structure of the Yoruba language so that I could learn how they were processing English and how they were speaking it, and learn how to correct them. And it made me a much better teacher. And of course, it gave me a much greater rapport with the students when they were really impressed that I was struggling with their language, and that I could know certain words that they were that they had used for the basis for their English translations. I had an innate propensity for teaching. My father was a teacher. Two of my brothers were teachers, although I don't think that influenced me in the classroom. But I enjoyed it, and that's important. And the rapport with students at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level, which is quite different, were really rewarding to me. Those were rewarding experiences. And so I was good at it. And I got a couple of teaching awards from the University at Buffalo.
That's really neat, Phil. What was the favorite class or favorite series that you taught back when you were at UB?
Okay. I achieved a reputation which not everybody would envy as being an authority on the occult, magic, sorcery, and witchcraft. At a large public university like UB, this was okay, but it might not have been so great at smaller colleges. I've always thought. But that incident of sorcery that I described to you in Nigeria started me in that direction. And I realized that this was a dimension of religious thinking, a dimension of supernatural thinking that anthropology had not fully explored. And I looked at it from a new perspective. And anthropology does well teaching courses in religion, which is mostly about people's beliefs in supernatural forces which are elevated. They are up above us. Most of the gods and major religious forces in the world are conceived of as being up above or down below, in the few cases of cultures that believe in a nether world, but the realm of forces on our level, especially forces which people can control directly and which they can use for their benefit or to oppose other people, this area of supernatural thinking was not well organized in anthropology. There was a lot of writing about it, but it was disparate. It was all over the place. And so I started focusing on that in the 1970s, and I conceptualized a course, The Anthropology of Magic, Sorcery, and Witchcraft, which became instantly successful. It attracted well over 100 students. In a couple of years, it was over 200 students, and I taught it every single year. And it was popular. It got great reviews from the students. And so that became kind of my identity. I also developed a course in the anthropology of religion, a much more traditional course. But that got less than half of the enrollment that my course in magic and witchcraft was able to draw. And in the 70s and 80s, those numbers were really high. In the 90s and the 2000s, the interest fell off and didn't draw as many as it used to. So these kinds of interests rise and fall with other things that are going on in the broader culture, you know. But I would have to say, to answer your question, that was the area in which my reputation was really built. I taught courses in Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. I taught that many times, and that was good. And African cultures, peoples of Africa. I taught a successful graduate level course in cultural change. But of all of those topics, the anthropology of magic and witchcraft was probably the one most associated with me. I've published several articles. I conceptualized a book a long time ago, and I'm still working on that book. I have another idea for a book, which I'd like to get to quickly as soon as possible. A collection of stories about the trickster figure of the African culture where I did my dissertation research, far removed from the Yoruba area. The trickster is a fascinating figure in world folklore. It's usually male, is kind of the embodiment of negative values. People laugh at him, at his ability to foil authority figures and to violate social norms. But he's clever but not smart, if that makes any sense. He's actually kind of stupid in many instances, and he gets himself into trouble. He doesn't win. And so the bottom line is that this may all be funny, and we may secretly be envious of someone who can get away with violating social norms, sexual norms, civil rules about theft, about personal property, and so on. But it doesn't pay. You don't win. The African trickster has been studied in different cultures, and the Bachama people, where I did my dissertation research, are a Bantu group who have drawn cultural influences from Central Africa as well as from West Africa. And their trickster character is really fascinating. So I want to write a book about him. Collecting trickster stories was one of my pastimes when I was doing research in Bachama. I traveled around to different villages to talk to people on different topics, and I spent many hours sitting and waiting. The idea of an appointment is different from ours. The notion of scheduling is different from ours. People have different concepts of time. And I had many, many occasions when I was absolutely idle, waiting for what I considered to be an appointment and what someone else considered to be, okay, maybe this or that time when the sun is about over here, you know. And during those idle times, I would ask local people to tell me stories, and I would record the stories on my tape recorder. And storytelling is a popular profession. It is a profession among these people. And larger towns have storytellers. The smaller villages usually don't. A storyteller is a proficient person, male or female, must be a good storyteller in our sense of the word, but also must be a good actor because he or she acts out the roles of the characters in the stories. And I made connections with different towns' storytellers, and they, of course, were delighted to be invited by me to tell their stories into my tape recorder, especially since public education had come in and their usual audience of kids were much scarcer most of the time. Most kids were going to school. And so I collected a lot of stories about the trickster. And they should be put into a book.
I think that would be an extremely fascinating book, Phil. Wow. So that actually leads into my next question, which is, what is something you're hoping to accomplish? This book, something else, anything that's on your radar that you want to accomplish?
I really do want to finish my book about sorcery and witchcraft. Some of your audience might have attended my talks around Erie County, and they were introduced to my theory that the fundamental elements of magical thinking are fundamentally human. People automatically think in these ways about the way the world works. And it's, even though I conceptualized the idea more than 30 years ago, it is still new. It hasn't been done by anyone else yet. And so I want to do that. And I really do want to do the book of trickster stories. A lot of people in Nigeria are waiting for it. And now there's a whole new generation who are far removed from their traditions. And I'm not sure that stories about the trickster are even told anymore because the old art is disappearing so rapidly. And so it will be a great service to the people, a book about an important dimension of their traditions. Also, that they're very, very funny. These are really, really good stories, and they really should be published.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure they would really appreciate help with preserving a piece of their culture, like you're saying, to hand down to those who maybe don't know or aren't aware anymore. So the last question I have for you is one fact about you that nobody really knows.
At that school where I taught from 1963 to 65, I was librarian, games master, Latin teacher. Believe it or not, I taught Latin in Nigeria. It was a total flop, but it was on the books, and they needed a Latin teacher because the schools government curriculum said that they should. You know, this is a holdover from the British colonial era. Nigeria was independent in 1960, and I came along just not quite 3 years later. And the colonial structure was pretty much still in place. Latin was on the curriculum. Nobody wanted to learn it. Nobody wanted to teach it. So I taught Latin as a basis for English. And I gave the kids vocabularies, Latin vocabularies, which were the bases for English words. And I used Latin as a foundation for improving their English. And nobody minded that I wasn't teaching Latin grammar or the works of Cicero or Caesar, you know. Nobody minded at all. And that's how I got away with teaching Latin to Yoruba school kids, Yoruba Muslim co-ed school kids. It was interesting. So maybe that'll work as a little fact that nobody knew about me, right?
Well, it sounds like you did a great job, and it also shows that you're down for anything, which is what I appreciate you for, Phil. You're always willing to help me with the program and do whatever you can, hence being my first interview. So without further ado, I think we're done here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun. It's been an honor, and I'm glad to help the University Express. As a longtime professor in a public university, I feel kind of an obligation. I've been partly supported by taxpayers, and I should give back.
Well, we're glad that you are. Thank you so much. And everyone, Phil will be teaching 2 classes for us in the spring semester, but you'll have to stay tuned to see what those are because we're not going to give it away just yet.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.